going to cover three topics today: Chinese real estate, what's going on there, the United Auto Workers strike in Detroit with the big three automakers, and inflation. Hi, my name is Ben Reppond. Welcome to my YouTube broadcast. Today is September 19th, 2023. I want to say thank you to those who attended, or if you watched later, my live broadcast last Friday. I'm going to continue those. I don't know yet at what frequency. We're thinking about what to do there. I apologize for the low quality of the video. I think the sound was okay, but the video was poor quality. And that's just an issue with the internet. And, you know, I'm in Montana, so it's part of the problem. And we're going to work on that and see if we can find a better solution. And so anyway, thank you for those of you who attended and for your generous comments. Thank you. To begin with, so you've undoubtedly heard or read about the real estate bubble that is in China. And what they've done is the developers have built cities in China, and literally just built out cities with apartments, hundreds of thousands of units, expecting people to come from the farms and to fill up those units. That has apparently not happened to the extent that they thought it would. So you've got this huge overbuilding. It was built on debt. So Evergrande and others, you'll see some of them in this clip, have built, I think Country Garden was another one. They have built gone into debt, built huge cities. Evergrande went bankrupt. And now you've got these ghost cities sitting there with no one in them, completely built out, like we've never seen. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But I think this is going to end up in some kind of a collapse because it's built on debt, too much speculation, and it reminds me of our stock market. The stock market here and elsewhere gets ahead of itself. You say, okay, there's this opportunity, this promise, things are getting better or going to get better, and then people rush in and get ahead of themselves, and then that has got to eventually come back to reality. Anyway, it's a piece from the Wall Street Journal. I thought you would enjoy it. It's just a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, and it explains kind of the situation and what's going on. So take a listen.
This is Forest City, a mega development in southern Malaysia built by the troubled Chinese real estate firm Country Garden. The plan was to build housing for some 700,000 people with luxury facilities throughout.
There's a water park, a garden maze, a beach that no one can swim in, and a commercial street, which will eventually be something like a shopping mall. But hardly anyone is using them. Only about 9,000 people live here, and most of the units that you see behind me are actually still empty. Forest City is emblematic of some of the core issues that have led to China's property crisis, like overbuilding, overborrowing, and a streak of bad luck. So here's what Forest City tells us about some of the challenges facing China's economy today.
Traditionally, real estate has been the main way that people in China have grown their wealth, buying into a booming property sector that makes up a significant portion of the world's second largest economy. But over time, the demand to buy has far outstripped the amount of housing that was actually needed. That's led to mostly empty, unfinished developments, sometimes called ghost cities, around the country, which now mainly function as a place for investors to park their money. The developers building them took on huge amounts of debt, confident that China's population would keep buying new property. But trouble started in 2021 with the default of China Evergrande Group, triggering protests from angry suppliers and investors trying to recoup their losses, and homeowners demanding that their unfinished homes be completed.
The next year, it was followed by Sunac China, another major developer. Over the past 2 years, dozens of Chinese real estate developers have fallen into financial distress.
Country Garden was one of the largest survivors, and it was previously viewed as more stable and prudent than its competitors.
Part of Country Garden's strategy within China was to build Tier 3 cities where land was cheap and they had a lot of support from local government. They were confident that over time, these places would grow and there would eventually be demand for their buildings. They could build really big, really fast, at a very low cost.
Now I'm going into the United Auto Workers strike, the UAW. This is the primary union in Detroit for the automakers, and they have struck. This strike began last week, and so these pieces are drawn from last week. So some of them are right around the time of the strike or leading up to the strike. So you'll notice that. I'm going to play a piece which illustrates the side of the worker and what their demands are, and they're insisting on getting what they're asking for, and the side of the union, I guess you'd say. And then I'm going to give you a couple of pieces from the side of management. One is from the current CEO of Ford, and one's from the former CEO. But I thought, all of these pieces when you put them together, they give, in my opinion, a good perspective on what's going on, the pros and cons, and both sides. So this piece is from the auto workers' point of view. So take a listen to what's going on there.
Michael, good evening. Adriana, good evening. Some encouraging news on the second day of the strike. A short 8-word statement from the United Auto Workers Union reading, "We had reasonably productive conversations with Ford today," but keep in mind, that's only one of the big 3 automakers they're striking against. And the longer this lasts, the bigger impact for not just auto workers, but all Americans.
On day 2 of the strike, auto workers are back on the picket lines, and both sides are back at the negotiating table. Nearly 13,000 workers walked off the job Friday, demanding higher pay, a shorter work week, and a return of pensions.
There's some people here that are $17 an hour. I mean, even strike pay is probably almost equal to what they're bringing home.
The latest proposals from automakers Ford, GM, and Stellantis, the parent company of Jeep and Chrysler, are about half of what the union wants. Despite record profits and skyrocketing CEO salaries, GM CEO Mary Barra told CBS News Friday the company can't afford the union's demands.
For the life of the contract, the initial demands were over $100 billion. We still have a ways to go.
The strikes have halted production at 3 plants, but the effects are far-reaching. Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's, says a prolonged strike could lead to more layoffs, higher auto prices, and less tax revenue coming in.
The auto industry is the cornerstone of the nation's manufacturing base, which is key to economic growth.
And Ford has already temporarily laid off 600 non-striking workers, and GM said it may have to lay off 2,000 more. Now, the UAW president, Shawn Fain, said, quote, "That's them trying to put the squeeze on our members to settle for less." Adriana?
Michael George, thank you.
Next is a piece from CNBC's Scott Wapner is interviewing Mark Fields, who's the former CEO of Ford, and I think he gives a good perspective. Now, keep in mind, this is the management perspective. Now, when I look at this, in my former life, I was a CEO of a company in Seattle, and we were not union, but I always kind of looked at things from the management side, but the way we ran our business, I always tried to balance the profitability, which went to the shareholder, and the treating the workers fairly. Tried to find a balance, even without a union. And I think and as we dealt with a lot of our customers, a lot of companies, what I experienced was a lot of them try to do the same thing. The shareholder should be paid well for their investment, but also the workers who create that should be treated well. And so as you listen to these pieces, think about, that's how I look at it, is where do they find the balance? And then in the negotiations, what's interesting is the auto companies, they don't really have any leverage. Think about it. They can say, no, I'm not going to accept that. Well, what are your alternatives? You can't go hire other workers. You've got to negotiate something. But if it's too much, you give away too much, then you go bankrupt. And that's exactly, you may remember this through the 80s, that's what happened to the airlines. They negotiated such rich contracts that they literally went out of business. And you've got plenty of companies now, Eastern and I can't remember all of them now that are just no longer exist. And and some of them had to end up merging or being bought out because they just negotiated too rich a contract. So, but it has to be a balancing act. So anyway, it's interesting. So this one is from Mark Fields, former CEO of Ford. So take a listen.
Let's bring in Mark Fields. He's the former Ford Motor Company president and CEO. It's nice to see you, a CNBC contributor as well. So you heard, I presume, Phil's report. Are you expecting a strike?
Well, I think there's a much higher probability this go around in contract talks than in the past for the things that Phil mentioned. I mean, you got a couple of things going on here. You got a newly reconstituted union that was still recovering from the corruption charges. So you have a new leader who's been using very bellicose language, calling the automakers the true enemy of the UAW. So he's setting expectations very high for his union members. And in the same time, you have the automakers that are going through this once in a century changeover in propulsion systems, which have, higher costs and lower margins right now. So it's a setup for a very contentious set of discussions.
Shawn Fain's tactics are different as well than in the past, aren't they? In terms of the UAW, you know this better than anybody, would traditionally not sort of lay out the hand on the table and say, Andy, up here. They're putting everything out there pretty much, right? Telling exactly the automakers, the big three, what we want. Come meet us. This is different, isn't it?
Well, it's very different. And again, the new leader, he's never led a national negotiation before. He's basically led plant level discussions. But listen, he's ripping a page. He's kind of distancing himself from the past of the UAW leadership because of the corruption issues. It was very mysterious. They used to elect the president via delegates versus direct election. He was elected directly, and he's using all social media to be very transparent to his union members on what the expectations are, and that may paint him into a corner because he may get expectations so high that it might be very difficult for when he brings a contract back for the rank and file to ratify it. So he's playing a bit of a dangerous game here, but at the same token, he feels he has a mandate. But keep in mind, Scott, he was only elected by about 500 votes out of about 145,000 union members. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And as one of the past union leaders said, it's easy to take a union out on strike, but it takes a leader to bring them back to work. So we're going to see what kind of leader Shawn Fain is.
Back in the 1970s, I spent my former career in Seattle. And in 1971, April of 1971, if you're from Seattle or visited Seattle in that time, you know that Boeing had 100,000 workers in Seattle. They laid off 70,000 workers, mostly, from all aspects, both salaried and hourly. And at that time, Seattle was not diversified. They relied heavily on Boeing. And the saying in Seattle was, as Boeing goes, so goes Seattle. And that was true. The matter of fact, there was what's called a multiplier effect. For every worker that lost their job in Boeing, there was a multiplier effect of 3 to 5 times. I heard 3 and I heard 5 of other workers would lose their job if that worker at Boeing lost theirs. And conversely, if they hired a worker at Boeing, it had an expanding effect on the economy. I remember this because I was just beginning my career out of college, and the sign as you went, it was now called, it's I-90, it used to be US 70 or US 10, going east out of Seattle there was a bend in the road just as you came out of Seattle, just east of the stadium, And before you went into the tunnel, there was a sign that said, "Will the last person leaving Seattle turn out the lights?" And that got quoted a lot. And it came about from the fact that Seattle was kind of decimated from that. Now, I won't say that that was from the strike or strikes that occurred, but following that, I remember numerous strikes over the years, many strikes, where the machinists and aerospace workers would negotiate these contracts, much like the automakers are doing right now with the UAW. And same thing, no leverage. And they would go on strike. And I remember some of the strikes lasting quite a long time. And at that time, when that happened, no airplanes were made. The auto workers paid a price, but the shareholders and the management, the company itself, they paid a price. And I remember the last time they negotiated one. I think it was in the 90s. I don't remember the date. But again, I thought the aerospace workers kind of held a gun to the head of management and said, "You give us this or we're not coming back," basically. And there was no leverage. They had to do it. Well, I was thinking in my mind, if I'm Boeing, I would get out of here. And exactly what happened. They left Seattle. And so corporate is in Chicago, and then they'd have a big assembly plant in South Carolina. They went to non-union states for assembly. They have the parts made many times in other states or offshore, and they figured a way to get out from under that desperate situation of not having any alternative. And so, and I think that, I don't know what the auto workers' alternative is, but you'll listen to some of these pieces. But the next piece is from Jim Farley, who is the current Ford CEO. And as he talks about this, I didn't realize it. You'll hear him say this, but that what they're asking for is a 40% increase in pay, a 4-day work week, and I don't mean 4 tens, I mean a 4-day work week. I'm assuming that's 4 eights, so 32 hours, and reinstating pensions, etc. What that brings the workers to is $300,000 pay package, $300,000 annual salary. Now, part of that is benefits. So the benefits plus the cash compensation, $300,000. So if they're asking for a 40% pay raise, that tells me that they already have pay of $200,000 or more by the time they put the 40% on, getting to $300,000. Well, who wouldn't want that? So if they get that, and this falls on the heels of the Teamsters negotiating the pay for the drivers, UPS drivers, for $140,000 to $170,000, which they got. And again, it's a union contract. Where does it stop? What about the postal workers or other workers that we rely on every day for? They could say, we want more, we want our share, we want that 300,000 or 100 or 200,000. You can't blame them for wanting more money, and I realize inflation's going on and they should get some, but if you ask for too much, what you do is you end up breaking the company that you're trying to get the money from. So there has to be a balance. If you don't treat the shareholders well and give the company an adequate return on their investment, then you can ask for all you want and the company won't exist anymore. They will come to some kind of conclusion. The problem here is that the CEOs voted themselves a 40% pay increase, I assume, I heard that, on average, 40% more to the CEOs. Well, they shot themselves in the foot, because that makes me want to be sympathetic to the workers. It's like they're the ones that created that profit by making those cars, and they're saying, well, if that's good for you, shouldn't that be good for us? That's a good argument. So I'm not trying to take one side or the other. I do see the side of the worker, but I also see the side of the management. So hopefully they will be able to find a way to come together and get this resolved. But again, I thought Jim Farley in this next piece, also from CNBC, does a good job of adding to what I've already played. So take a listen.
Joining us now is Ford CEO Jim Farley with our own Phil LeBeau. Phil?
John, thank you very much. Jim, we're a little over 7 hours away from the strike deadline. Where do things stand? You've made your most recent offer. What have you heard back from the UAW?
Well, everyone imagines we're in some room squirreled away doing this final negotiation, and that's what we would love for the last 2 weeks. But nothing's going on. We've received no counteroffer from Shawn Fain in the UAW.
Nothing at all?
No.
How frustrated are you with this situation?
Well, we've never seen it before. In 80 years, we've always been able to work through these differences because we're always on the side of labor at Ford. We have the highest UAW headcount. We have more people than anyone, build more vehicles. We've never seen anything like this. It's frustrating because many of our team members have negotiated successfully on non-economic issues with the national negotiators. But somehow when we get to these marquee money issues, everything stops. And it's a mystery. We've been putting contracts and negotiating with ourselves since the 29th for 2 weeks. And we still have not had any kind of counteroffer for all those major things. And we're on the eve of one of the largest strikes in our history.
Do you believe Shawn Fain is truly negotiating in good faith, or do you think this is a case of he's not even giving you a counteroffer here? He's made it a decision, we're going on strike.
Well, I think he's certainly planning. When I saw Facebook Live, he didn't even acknowledge our offer that Bill Ford, the chairman of the company, made 2 days ago until last night, and we still have not gotten an offer. I don't know what Shawn Fain is doing, but he's not negotiating this contract with us as it expires. But I know he's busy planning a strike. We don't want it. I know he thinks this will be a historic strike with all three plants, all three companies. But we want to make history with a historic deal.
We have talked with people familiar with their plans in terms of what they might announce tonight. Livonia, your transmission plant, really the bread and butter in terms of putting the engines and the vehicles, everything together. That's going to be hit, according to what we understand. What would that do? What kind of chaos would that cause for your manufacturing?
It's enormous. For a engine, transmission, or stamping plant, all the downstream assembly plants would be affected within hours or days. And what most Americans don't realize is that although that would disrupt the manufacturing and the assembly of vehicles, many of those workers may not be eligible for the strike fund or for even unemployment. So at a personal level, our employees get hurt.
So how quickly would you have to potentially lay off people from a final assembly plant because you're not getting transmissions in, and therefore there's no production?
Well, within hours or days, depending on the plant and how much float we have, we'll have to shut plants, assembly plants, hours or days.
Quickly put in some perspective, the offer that they have, what they're demanding relative to where you are right now, how much damage would that do to the bottom line if you were to say, sure, we'll give you 40%?
If we signed up for the UAW's request, instead of making money and distributing $75,000 in profit sharing in the last 10 years, we would have lost $15 billion and gone bankrupt by now. The average pay would be nearly $300,000 fully fringed for a 4-day work week. There is no way.
Per employee, per UAW employee.
Yeah, this is our fully tenured school teacher in the U.S. makes $66,000. Someone from the military or fireman makes mid-50,000. This is 4 or 5 times, 6 times what they make. There's no way we can be sustainable as a company. That's why we put our proposal in 2 weeks ago to say, look, you want us to choose bankruptcy over supporting our workers? Here's our proposal. Let's work through this. We've heard nothing.
And finally, I want to play a piece from Mohamed El-Erian on inflation. Inflation has kicked back up. The consumer price index kicked up to 3.7%, went from 3% to 3.2 to 3.7 after it had come down quite a bit. So this is interesting, and he says that inflation will get more complicated from here. In other words, the Fed's desire is to get inflation down to 2%. And he says and implies that's probably not going to happen. It's just, so we still have what's called sticky inflation. It's definitely going up. You feel it at the pump and the grocery store, so do I. And it's just a difficult situation. The Fed has boxed themselves in a corner, and by printing too much money, creating too much money supply. And but anyway, a good piece from Mohamed El-Erian. Take a listen.
And our next guest, who's now at the table, says the last mile in the Fed's inflation fight could prove to be more complicated than the market expects. Joining us right now is Mohamed El-Erian, Chief Economic Advisor at Allianz and President of Queen's College, Cambridge. I want to talk about this idea that it's actually going to be harder because in many ways the market, and I think so many actually Fed heads and other people around the Fed would say it's easier. Now that actually inflation has come down, this last sort of piece of the puzzle, there's a lot more flexibility in terms of when you raise, when you lower, what you do, whereas before was actually the hard part.
So there's two different issues. One is what do the inflation dynamics look like? And two, the policy dynamics. The assumption in the marketplace is that inflation will continue to go down, right, and that we're going to have core well-behaved. Headline may pop up for a little bit, but it will come down. And importantly for policy, that means the pause in September becomes the end of the hiking cycle, and we cut rates next year.
Right.
That's what the market thinks. What I think is going to happen is headlines going to prove much more complicated. Already you've seen people push up their month-on-month projections of headline all the way up to 0.6, 0.7. I think core inflation will be well less behaved, and then the Fed at the end of the year is going to have a choice. Do we live with 3% plus inflation, or do we crush the economy?
Okay, I want to thank you for watching. That's it for today. Inflation is everywhere, and it impacts all of us. And none of us get a vote in it either. And matter of fact, you can't even vote for the people who are voting for it because they're all appointed positions. But it's just my explaining is not to say that you can do something about it, but more here's the reality of what's going on. Thank you for watching.